First contact, a laugh from the stars in the cold silence of deep space. A group of aliens sat inside a massive space station orbiting a dying red star. The Scyther Empire had ruled this part of the galaxy for over 2,000 years. They had explored thousands of planets, destroyed hundreds of civilizations, and made many species their slaves. To them, strength was everything. Weakness was disgusting. Logic was law. Emotion was a flaw. So when a report came in about a small blue planet called Earth, most of them didn't even bother to look inside the council chamber. A tall alien with pale green skin and silver eyes looked bored as he read the summary on his tablet. His name was Commander Dravak. He tapped the screen and laughed. Earth is a wet little rock full of war, pollution, and loud emotional creatures called humans. Primitive apes with metal toys. Why are we even talking about them? Others around the table chuckled. One alien said they still burn fuel and fight over imaginary lines on land. Another said they cry when their pets die. Dravak stood up and said this is a species that worships the sky and dances in the rain. Pathetic, but at the end of the table sat someone who did not laugh. His name was Kvar, a low-ranking alien scientist who often studied strange phenomena in the galaxy. He had seen the report too, but something had caught his eye. While others saw human weakness, he saw a question no one had asked. There was an anomaly in Earth's atmosphere. A strange set of readings not found on any other planet in the galaxy. The oxygen was expected. The nitrogen levels made sense, but there was something else. A pattern hidden in the ionosphere. A movement too regular to be natural, yet too chaotic to be artificial. He stood slowly and spoke. There is something wrong with Earth's air. Something intelligent. Everyone turned to him. Some laughed again. Dravak said, "Are you suggesting their clouds are thinking?" Kvar didn't smile. "I am suggesting that Earth may not be as weak as it looks." Silence followed. The council chair tapped her claw on the table. "You may investigate further, but do not waste our time unless you find a weapon. We conquer planets. We do not fear wind and water." Later that day, Kvar sat in his lab staring at the data. The more he zoomed in, the more patterns he found. Currents in the atmosphere seemed to follow ships in orbit for brief seconds before breaking apart. Sunstorms would pause for exactly 6 seconds, then continue. Lightning struck with mathematical timing. It was as if the weather was listening. Watching. Waiting, he launched a small scout probe and sent it toward Earth. The probe was fast, silent, and equipped with high-level sensors. As it entered Earth's upper atmosphere, it began scanning. But within minutes, the sensors started to go dark. First, the thermal scanners failed. Then the radiation monitors stopped. Finally, the navigation system showed it was spinning in circles, though nothing was pushing it. Kvar watched the feed as the image flickered. He could see clouds forming rapidly under the probe. But the formation was strange. The clouds twisted in tight circles like a symbol being drawn in the sky. It looked almost like a warning. Then a lightning bolt shot straight up into the sky and struck the probe. The screen went black. The room was silent. Kvar stood frozen, staring at the dead monitor. He checked the logs again. The probe had been hit by lightning with a precise charge, not random, not natural. Designed. He walked slowly to the council chamber again. This time no one laughed when he entered. He said in a quiet voice, "The planet is reacting to our machines. It is not defending itself with weapons, but with the world itself. Earth may not be intelligent, but something inside it is." Dravak frowned. "You are saying their planet is alive?" Kvar shook his head. "I am saying their planet is aware." A silence filled the room again. The council chair leaned forward. "Send a science team. Watch from orbit. Do not engage. And find out what Earth truly is." As Kvar walked out of the chamber, he felt a strange sensation in his chest. Not fear, not excitement, something in between. He looked back at the star map. Earth was a tiny blue dot glowing against the darkness, The humans were still sleeping, but the air around them was awake, and it had just noticed the stars were watching. Warning that no one heard, Kavar did not sleep the night after the probe went silent. He kept replaying the final image in his mind over and over again. The storm had not moved like a normal storm. It had twisted itself into a perfect spiral, then struck. With a force measured down to the last decimal, there was no error, no randomness, no chaos. It was not weather, it was action. He sat alone in his lab staring at the broken data stream, trying to piece together what the last moments of the probe had. Recorded radiation levels had spiked, but not in the usual patterns. Something had bent the energy around the probe and then pushed it out of the sky. There were no weapons, no ships, no known tech. It was just the sky, and it had acted with purpose. Wrote his findings quickly and sent them to the Galactic Science Council, but no one responded, not in the first hour, not in the second. By the 6th hour, his reports were marked as received, but unread. He knew what this meant. They did not believe him. They had already decided Earth was weak, and anything he said now was considered paranoia. Still, he refused to give up. He needed more proof. Not just numbers, not just strange lightning. He needed eyes on the ground. He activated a second drone. This one smaller, faster, and programmed not to scan, but simply to observe. No signals, no disturbance, just silent watching. He launched it on a hidden route and guided it through the dark side of Earth's orbit. The drone slipped through the atmosphere. Like a whisper, it floated above the clouds near a large mountain range, the Himalayas' snow-covered peaks. Clouds low and thick, the perfect place for peace. But then something strange happened. The clouds moved not from wind, not from temperature, but in straight lines. The air bent as if a shape was passing through unseen. Drone's camera caught a brief image, a shadow inside the mist, not a creature, not a ship, but something wide and formless, like a wave moving against gravity. And then the sound came through the drone's microphone. A low hum, not mechanical, not natural. Either it sounded almost like breathing deep, steady, heavy. Kavar leaned forward, eyes wide. He turned up the gain, and the hum became clearer. There was a rhythm to it, like a pattern, and after 10 seconds, the drone's compass spun wildly. The screen glitched. The signal cracked and then cleared again, and when it did, the drone was facing upward, showing the clouds swirling above, forming again. Same spiral shape. This time the spiral glowed faintly blue, and in the center was a flash of light, not like lightning, but like an eye-opening. Then the drone shook once, twice, and the signal froze. Kavar waited, breath held, but nothing came back, not a single byte of data. He sat there frozen in silence, staring at a dead screen again. The second drone, lost in the same sky, walked to the command hub and stood before the council again. This time not asking for permission, he demanded attention. He said, "I have now lost 2 probes in Earth's atmosphere, both destroyed by non-weaponized events. Both times the weather moved in patterns no other world has shown. Both times energy signatures were targeted, precise, reactive, and repeating." Dravak stood slowly, his voice calm but sharp. "You are making a fool of yourself, Kavar. Weather is not alive. Storms do not strike on purpose. Clouds do not glow." Kavar raised his voice. "Then explain the spiral, explain the humming, explain why every probe sent to Earth disappears without a trace." The room fell silent again. The council chair stared at him for a long moment, then spoke. "Send a science team, this time crude and silent. No contact, no scans. Just observe, Kavar. You will lead them and bring back real answers or nothing at all." Within hours, the ship was prepared. It was called the Silith 1, a small research vessel with cloaking systems and full atmospheric shields. It launched quietly from the station, heading toward Earth, a quiet blue marble floating in blackness. Harmless in appearance, beautiful even. But Kavar no longer saw beauty. He saw something else, something older, deeper, colder. As the ship approached Earth, the clouds began to move again, slowly, gently, like waves preparing for something. The ship dropped into orbit, and the crew sat in silence watching the monitors. And then it happened again. The winds shifted, the pressure changed, and the skies began to form that spiral for the third Time Kavar stood watching from the observation deck. He felt something he had never felt before on any mission. Not fear, not panic, something heavier, like being watched, not by a creature, not by an eye, but by the world itself. He whispered to no one, "The air knows we are here," and far below, hidden in the mist, the mountain. Winds whispered back, the weather that fights back. The Silith One moved like a ghost above Earth, drifting silently over the highest clouds, its engines whispering through the cold air. The crew sat in silence, watching the monitors as cloud patterns twisted beneath them, moving with an intelligence no one wanted to admit was real. Kavar stood near the observation window, eyes locked on the storm forming below. It wasn't just a gathering of clouds. It was a shape, a spiral again, this time faster, sharper, more focused, as if it recognized the ship above and was no longer curious but cautious. The crew ran quiet scans, just atmospheric data, no active signals. No interference yet. The monitors began flickering. The numbers changed too quickly too. Record wind speeds rising and falling in impossible waves, temperature spikes in the upper layers, radiation pulses every 10 seconds. Kavar watched it all and said softly, "It's watching us again." They sent a lander down, small and unmanned. It touched down on a snow-covered slope near a Himalayan peak. Visibility was low, mist crawling over the ground as if dragged by invisible hands. The lander's camera turned slowly, showing the empty landscape. Then something moved behind the fog, something small. A figure stepped into view. It was a human, a child no older than 10, standing alone in the snow, barefoot in the cold, looking directly into the camera. He was not shivering, not afraid. His hair danced slightly in the wind, but his eyes were calm, still, and old, too old for a child. Kavar leaned forward, heart pounding. The boy spoke softly, not in words, but in thought. A wave of meaning filled the ship's speakers, translated through the energy in the air. The voice was clear and calm. "You should not be here." Monitors sparked. The lander shook. The clouds above twisted hard and fast. Lightning began to crack in a rhythm, like a pulse. The crew panicked. Systems started blinking. The lander feed went black, but before it did, one last image froze on the screen. The boy raising his hand toward the sky, and the storm answering him with a roar. Kavar shouted, "Shut it all down." They powered off every scanner, every system, even their comms. They floated dark in the sky, hoping silence would hide them. The atmosphere calmed slowly, the spiral unraveled, and the winds softened as if losing interest. The crew sat in stunned silence, trying to understand what they had just seen. A human child connected to the weather storms that respond to emotion, lightning that moves like thought. Kavar whispered, "Not defense, not warning. This is response. This is communication." Dravu had insisted on joining the mission, stepped forward, face pale, his voice unsure. "What are they? How can they survive this? How can they live with a sky that thinks?" Kavar replied, "They don't control it. They coexist with it, and maybe it protects them." They reviewed ancient Earth data, old human records, forgotten military files, experiments in weather control, long-abandoned projects meant to weaponize storms, create rain in deserts or droughts in war zones. Most had failed, but something had remained unfinished, unnoticed, maybe even awakened. The Earth had been shaped by centuries of pollution, war, suffering, and survival. Its atmosphere had adapted, had mutated, had evolved into something far beyond natural science, and now it was learning from the humans who lived under it. Outside the ship, the clouds began to rise, slowly forming into walls around the orbit path, not touching them, just surrounding, like a warning, not a trap, but a message. The crew stared at the swirling sky, unsure if they were safe or prisoners. Kavar turned back to his console and typed a message to the council. Simple and clear: Earth's weather is not weather, it is behavior. It is intention, and we are the disturbance it feels. He stood there silent as the clouds shifted again, and lightning crawled across the sky in slow patterns, not wild, not random, but precise, as if writing something in the air. And in that moment, Kavar realized Earth was not just protecting itself, it was listening, learning, and remembering every visitor that came near, every machine that touched its breath, every eye that stared. Too long the weather was not angry, but it was aware, and awareness was more dangerous than any weapon as the ship floated higher back into safer orbit. The last thing they saw was the storm, breaking apart gently, quietly, like a beast returning to its sleep. But even in rest, the skies above Earth never closed their eyes again. The hidden engine of Earth, the Silith 1, remained in high orbit, dark and silent, drifting above the clouds like a forgotten thought. No systems active, no signals sent. Only the faint hum of life support and the quiet breath of a crew now afraid to speak loudly, as if their voices might disturb the air below. Kavar stood alone in the observation room, staring at the endless blue sphere under them, his mind spinning. Not with fear, but with hunger, the kind that grows when a truth hides just beyond your reach, the kind that doesn't let you rest until it is pulled into light. He had seen the storm behave like a living system. He had watched lightning move like intention, and he had heard a boy speak without sound through the wind. He needed more, not just images, not just recordings. He needed to go deeper, not into the clouds, but into the past. He began accessing old Earth broadcasts, abandoned satellite channels, Cold War data leaks, files buried under centuries of digital dust. He read about experiments in cloud seeding, weather warfare, ion manipulation, but those programs had failed not because they didn't work, but because they worked too well and frightened the humans who built them. There were mentions of Project Stormvile, Project Thunderchild, strange names erased from human history, reports of localized tornadoes forming minutes after emotional outbursts of test subjects, computers burning out when flying too close to certain storm clusters, weather that responded to intention, not technology. And over time the projects were shut down and forgotten. But something had stayed alive, something hidden beneath the logic of science. Kavar found one file. Partially corrupted video, only 2 seconds long. It showed a human woman standing in a storm rain, circling her, but not touching her hair floating upward, wind pushing outward, not inward, her eyes glowing faintly blue before the screen went black. He enhanced the frame again and again, and in the final moment, saw a symbol in the air behind her, a spiral of wind, almost invisible, drawn by the rain itself. He turned to Dravak, who now watched him, not with contempt but with silent tension. "You were right," Kavar said. "It's not the humans. It's the planet, but the humans are not separate from it. They are part of its code." Frowned. "What code?" Kavar replied. "Not digital, not organic, something deeper. This world has a system, a hidden engine that responds to thought, to energy, to fear and love and rage. It is not just air, it is memory written into sky, into cloud, into the very breath of this planet." They launched another lander, this time with a low-frequency passive scanner tuned not to signals, but to resonance, to emotion. The craft descended slowly into the forest of South America, where thunderclouds had formed a perfect ring over the trees. No movement, no storm, just stillness and shape. The moment the lander touched ground, the scanner lit up, pulses flowing in waves from all directions. Not electric, not magnetic, but emotional energy vibrating in the air, like silent music, and it matched patterns recorded in human cities, moments before natural disasters, not after, before, as if the weather anticipated suffering and formed in reply. Kavar stared at the readings. "The system is predictive," he said, "not reactive. It doesn't wait for damage, it prepares for it, as if it can feel what is coming." One of the crew members whispered, "If this planet feels our thoughts, what happens if we feel fear? Does it attack us or protect us?" Kavar didn't answer because he didn't know, and he wasn't sure he wanted to. Suddenly, the ship's sensors blinked one by one, not from overload, but from interference. Something outside was passing through the clouds again, same shape as before, wide, slow, silent, a wave, not solid, not ghost, just presence. The lander feed flickered and came back, and in the center of the forest clearing, the child was standing again, but he was older now, his eyes darker, storm clouds gathering above him. His hand raised again, and the thunder began to speak, not in sound, not in voice, but in vibration. A feeling that entered their bones. "We were not made to be understood, we were made to be ignored, and in your ignorance you have awakened us." The crew backed away from the monitors. The lander shut down on its own, and the child turned and vanished into the mist. Back on the Silith 1, Kavar sat in silence, his Hands shaking slightly. The spiral is not a message, it is a lock, he said. And Earth is not just defending itself, it is hiding something. Something ancient buried inside. Its own sky, a consciousness, or maybe a prison. Dravak stepped closer, voice low. Then what happens if we break that lock? Kavar looked up, and for the first time his voice broke. Then, I think, Earth will not be a planet anymore. It will be something else, something we never meant to meet. And outside the window, the clouds began spinning. Again, slowly, not fast, not angry, but deliberate, like a clock ticking toward something. Only the sky remembers Earth's forgotten defense. The clouds had not stopped moving since the last encounter. They no longer drifted aimlessly but circled the planet like silent watchers, patterns forming and fading, spirals opening and closing, as if the skies were breathing, thinking, remembering something, old something, long buried inside the Silith, when no one slept, not because of fear, but because the air itself felt heavier. Each passing hour brought a new shift in pressure, a change in electromagnetic tone, not enough to damage their systems, but enough to make their bones hum. Kvar knew the atmosphere was not just reacting, it was adjusting, calibrating itself around them. He dug deeper into Earth's abandoned records, military satellites, forgotten databanks, human experiments, no longer public, all pointing to one hidden truth. Earth's atmosphere had once been tested for weaponization, but those tests had not been failures. They had been too successful, too unpredictable. One report from a human military base detailed a thunderstorm that erased a convoy without touching the ground. Lightning had struck in rhythmic bursts, disabling every vehicle, one by one, like fingers on a piano. No survivors, no trace, only melted metal and a heat signature that never cooled. Another file described a desert mission where an emotional breakdown by a soldier triggered a sandstorm so fierce that even the satellites above lost visibility. The storm had formed around him, followed him, then vanished. The moment he fell unconscious, the humans had shut down the program after that, calling it unstable, dangerous, unexplainable. But the weather had not stopped. It had simply learned to hide itself, to evolve. Kavar stood in front of the observation window again, this time with a question forming in his mind. Not, what is this planet doing, but why now? Why reveal itself now, after all this time, after millions of years of silence? Was it their presence that triggered it, or something else waking up from within? They sent the last lander this time, not with scanners, but with relics, a collection of ancient human devices, books, photographs, pieces of history that spoke of emotion, war, loss, love, symbols of what made humanity flawed and beautiful. And when the lander opened its doors, the skies responded, not with violence but with stillness. The clouds stopped, the wind fell silent, the pressure normalized, and for the first time since their arrival, Earth seemed to exhale. The cameras showed movement, small lights floating around the lander, not drones, not bugs, but particles glowing softly in the air. They moved slowly, weaving around the human artifacts, like memory made visible. Then the spiral began to form again, not in the clouds, but in the soil beneath the lander, a slow swirling of dirt and light that pulsed gently with every heartbeat in the ship above. The crew felt it without knowing what it was, a shared moment of presence. In that moment, they understood Earth was not attacking them, it was assessing them, measuring their intent, their fear, their curiosity, their aggression. It was not a planet of storms, it was a machine built over centuries, by accident and emotion, a defense system born from the pain of its people. It had no mind, no heart, but it had memory, and memory had become instinct. Kavar spoke softly. The humans never created a weather weapon, they created a weather soul, and it did what they could not. It watched, it protected, it learned, and now it remembers everything, even us. Dravak stepped forward, his voice low. If this planet remembers pain, what happens if we hurt it again? Kavar looked at him and did not answer, because the truth was already in the sky, and the clouds were shifting again. Slower this time, forming not a spiral but a shield around the Earth, a perfect ring of storms that circled the globe without touching it, as if daring anyone to come closer. A warning, but also an invitation. One of the crew members whispered, "Then what is Earth now a weapon, a being a warning, and Kavar finally said what he had feared since the first probe vanished. Earth is a guardian, and it no longer trusts the stars outside. The ship the Lightning began to trace lines through the atmosphere, not in chaos, but in symbols. Glyphs that matched none of their database's signals without sound. Messages without words, and above it all the silence of space now felt like a threat. The kind of quiet that comes just before the storm learns to speak, and Earth was almost ready to speak. A prison disguised as a planet. The Silith One hovered in orbit. Its engines powered down the ship, holding its breath, like everyone inside. The sky below them no longer looked like weather. It looked like memory, layers of clouds forming structures not random, not wild, but patterned like circuitry built into atmosphere. Itself a storm that was not just natural, but designed, shaped for purpose. And that purpose was no longer a mystery. Kavar stood alone in the archive chamber, his eyes locked on a decoded signal from the surface, the spiral that kept appearing across. Earth was not just a shape, it was a seal, a frequency-coded barrier. Locked not on the planet, but within it. The deeper he dug, the clearer it became. This planet was not just protecting itself, it was protecting everything else from something trapped inside, buried in ancient galactic records long before the Sither Empire. There were myths of a forgotten force, something dark and silent, something that consumed not with fire or teeth, but with thought. Entire systems wiped clean, their life erased. Their skies hollowed. The old empires called it the silence between suns, a force without a name, only remembered by the patterns. It left behind systems of storms, spirals of light, and then nothing. And when those patterns appeared, they marked the last breath of a world. Earth matched them all, the storms, the spirals, the unnatural atmospheric behavior, every signature aligned with the prison code, described in the lost language of the ancients, not written in stone or metal, but in pressure and movement, in pulse. Earth was not the origin of the silence, it was the cage, and humanity was born inside it. Kavar turned toward Dravik and the other crew members, who now stared at him with eyes wide, not in disbelief, but in dawning horror. This world was chosen because it was alive, because it could react, because it could evolve, the perfect place to hide a mind that should never think again. The humans were never meant to find the truth. They were supposed to live within the shell, never breaking it, never waking what slept inside. Something had gone wrong. The wars, the grief, the endless pain and noise of mankind had shaken the walls. Their emotion had fed the system. Their energy had stirred the silence. Now the cage was responding, and not just to them, but to the stars watching from above. The boy on the ground appeared again, this time older, still, his eyes now silver, his skin glowing faintly like lightning in human shape. And as he looked into the ship's camera, the feed did not shake, it did not glitch, it simply froze. And through that stillness, a thought arrived in every mind aboard the Silith One. Not words, not sound, just understanding. You should not have come. You brought light to a door meant to stay in shadow. Suddenly, the clouds below surged upward, not in rage, not in destruction, but in purpose. They rose around the ship, slowly wrapping it in thick mist. Sensors failed, data collapsed, communication went silent. Not jammed, not broken, just gone, like sound pulled into a vacuum. The crew stared at each other, unable to move, because every part of their bodies felt pulled downward, not by gravity, but by awareness. The planet now knew their names. Kavar gasped. The defense system is not just reacting, it is choosing. It is deciding what we are, and if we should stay. He turned to the console, but every screen now showed the same image, the spiral not spinning, not forming, just hovering, still waiting. And then it began to turn slowly clockwise, gentle, like the ticking of an old clock marking the countdown of something old. Ravak tried to speak, but the sound caught in his throat, as if the air itself denied him permission. And then, in that moment, the realization came. Earth was not just a prison, it was the final cell for something so powerful, so quiet, that no metal could hold it, only memory could, only feeling could, and humanity had unknowingly kept it asleep with their chaos, with their sorrow, with their dreams. And now the silence inside the cell was listening back. A deep sound filled the ship, like thunder underwater, like thought becoming sound, and the crew felt it, not in their ears, but in their blood. The presence of a mind not human, not alien, something older than both, something that had not spoken in a billion years, something that now asked, "Who are you, and why did you come?" And Earth waited for their answer. The last transmission, the Silith. One hung above the Earth, no longer a ship, but a question floating between two forces, the stars that feared silence and the planet that carried it. The crew stood still as the spiral continued its slow turn, the atmosphere now glowing faintly, as if the very sky had become a pulse, every beat carrying a memory, every vibration a choice inside the ship. The systems were dying, not from damage, but from stillness. Screens, frozen readings, paused air growing thicker, as if Earth itself had wrapped its hands around them, not to crush, but to hold like a parent, deciding whether to punish or protect. And deep in the ship, Kavar sat in front of the last active console, his fingers resting on keys he no longer needed, because the message had already been written. He pressed transmit, not to the council, not to the fleet, but to anyone who might hear. To anyone beyond the reach of Earth's voice. The signal was weak but clear, and in it Kavar did not speak of weapons or storms. He spoke of choice, of evolution, of memory. He said, "Earth is not a world, it is a story, one written in wind and grief and survival. It holds something inside it, something we sealed long ago and forgot. But it never forgot us." Drovak stood behind him, now silent, no longer the proud commander of a conquering empire, but just another creature staring into a mirror made of cloud and thunder, and the mirror stared back the child on the ground, now fully formed. Not a boy, not a being, but a shape made of lightning and memory, looked into the sky and raised his hand, and the spiral stopped. Everything went still. The clouds froze. The ship floated in a sky without sound or wind or time, and in that breathless space, the truth arrived, not in sound, but in presence. A knowledge so old, it cracked thought, a mind not alien, not human, not angry, just vast and cold and quiet. It said, "We were never the threat you were. We were the silence, and you broke it." And then came the light, not fire, not heat, but understanding. The ship was filled with it, the crew lost in it. Their minds opened, not broken, but shown what came before. Stars that screamed before they died, planets that turned to glass, entire empires erased not by war, but by forgetting. And Earth had been the last key, the last lock, the final breath held in the lungs of a galaxy that had hoped it would never be needed. And now someone had opened the door. The signal reached the edge of the system, bouncing from relay to relay, drifting like dust across stars. Some ignored it, some tried to block it, but a few listened, and those who did felt the same thing. Pressure in the sky above their own worlds, a quiet hum in their atmosphere, the feeling of a story waking up. Back on Earth, the spiral faded, the clouds returned to silence, the winds moved like breath again. The sky exhaled, and the ship was gone, not destroyed, not crashed, simply gone, folded into the space between memory and myth, its signal, the only trace it had ever been there. Years later on Earth, a young girl stood in a field of tall grass, watching the clouds twist into soft patterns above her. She felt no fear, only wonder, because deep in her bones, something ancient stirred, something that had always lived in the air around her, something that now listened when she sang to the wind, and the wind sometimes answered. Far beyond the stars, a voice echoed through the dark, not loud, not angry, just true. Do not mistake quiet for weakness, because some worlds are made of storms, and some storms remember everything. The end.